Hello folks, I'm going to start a new video series for the channel, that being a sort of deck review. If you've been paying attention to the uploads, you'll see that typically whenever I try one of these new decks that's coming out for the new format, I'm looking at, I play the deck for one or two or three locals, and we'll sort of chop and change it a little bit and see if we can arrive on a sort of finalized version. So to start with, we're going to talk about the big bad mono black teach. So I think this deck in the current format of OP09 is very solid. I think that the leader has a lot of really good matchups, in particular, anything yellow you're really great against, particularly Enel, or if you see any like Katakuri as well. But also you have good matchups into BY, though you do have a lot of troublesome matchups, mainly the big bad of the OP09 format being Doflamingo. So I wanted to talk about the OP09 build, sort of the key cards to highlight in the current build. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the tech choices that I've tried and what I think about them. And finally, we're going to move on to a little bit of talk about where this deck's going to go in the future, particularly with the new support that it gets in OP010. So, to start off, we're going to talk about what I think is the most important card in the whole Teach deck. One cost stage, full of lead. Now, I'm sure you're all very familiar with this effect. Trash 1, search top 3 for Blackbeard's Pirates, and add it to your hand. Talking firstly about why this card is the most important card in your deck is this card effectively lets you fill the holes that your deck has. Your deck is generally a pile of cards that most of them are reasonably decent and a couple of them are really good. But you need to be able to find the pieces that you're missing, or find the pieces that are good in particular matchups. The main con of this card, though, is that obviously, if it's an effective neg1, because every time you activate it, pitching a card to search a new card, that card replaces itself. But nothing ever replaces the original card when you play this. So it comes at a natural -1, but gives you a lot of searching potential and for no dawn investment as well on every subsequent turn. So currently I'm on 3 of this card in my list, and I mean you can definitely easily bump it up to 4. I've considered it, but when OP010 rolls around and we get the new Kuzan and the Liberation, the 6-drop event, this card becomes even better. And then with Kuzan, just being able, because Kuzan effectively turns your trash into your second hand, this card becomes even more valuable, just being able to dump cards into your trash. So, honestly, looking at the upcoming bans for after the World Finals, I could easily see this card being the card they hit out of Teach, because it just provides so much consistency for the deck. And you still keep the deck alive if this card isn't here, but you just keep it a bit more under control. But yeah, this card is excellent. Next card I'm going to talk about is Burgess. You should all probably be familiar with what he does, but if you're not, he cannot be KO'd by your opponent's effects, and if your leader is Blackbeard, has a Blackbeard Pirates type, he gets plus 1,000 power for every 4 cards in your trash. Typically, by the end of the game, this guy is quite easily swinging for 9, 10, 11k. And on a 4-drop body, that's seriously impressive. Not only that, he's really hard to remove unless you're bouncing him or bottom decking him. So against Doflamingo, they have, Gravity Blade, which can get rid of him, and they have the 4-cost Law, but obviously the 4-cost Law is a non-play, and if you're playing against Doflamingo, you're going to be trying to use your leader effect every single turn, so that they don't have on play, so that this guy can probably stick to the board. The interesting things that I want to talk about with Burgess is that when do you play Burgess? This is like one of the questions that you might find yourself asking in a game. I find that Burgess is one of those cards that gets better and better the earlier you play him. But also, if you never play him, you can really struggle. So you always need to be, especially in certain matchups like against Black Yellow Luffy or even against Doflamingo, having a turn where you can like sneak this guy in and not disrupt your game plan of destroying your opponent's characters. This guy then starts to accrue so much value. And if your opponent ever takes a turn off to attach a whole bunch of Dawn to their leader and swing into him, that is an insane tempo advantage for you. Especially if on the subsequent turn you can play one or even two of this card. And then, obviously with the OP09 Kuzan, this guy is one of the main targets that you're getting with that Kuzan because this is one of your best cards. So, I think Burgess probably shouldn't be banned for the upcoming bans, just because the deck loses a lot of its soul without Burgess. I think that if with the new starter deck coming out, featuring Blackbeard as the leader, I think that you could ban this if you're going to give us like a sort of newer, updated version. Maybe something that's basically the same, but the card restriction is different. Like, I thought of something like if it gets plus 2k power for every 8 or 10 cards in your trash, just so you don't get that like gradual increase. So he's not very good until the late game. But I really don't think they're going to hit this card, but they might. But this is one of your key pieces. And I think if you're learning to play Blackbeard, knowing when is right to play your Burgess is one of the most important things. It's really, really important. One of the other best cards in your deck, of course, is the 10-cost Teach. This guy is what you're aiming towards. He's what you're trying to get to. He's a giant blocker, and the negating of your opponent's leader effect is really great in certain matchups, such as Shanks or Bonnie. And then being able to just negate and stun a character is fantastic. Fantastic. The main issues that you reach when you play this card is that this is your whole turn, right? So typically, you get to 10 Dawn, you play this, freeze one of their guys, you swing with leader, maybe if you have a Burgess, you swing with that, and you pass. And the idea is that you're going to chain typically 2 of these, but in some cases 3. Being able to search each turn with your stage helps to find them. You chain a couple of these, and you're hoping that you'll eventually reach the sort of pinnacle endpoint where your opponent has been beaten down enough that they will just die. And this being a blocker will also help keep you alive until you maybe play a couple of these in a row and you've got your opponent low enough. One of the interesting things with this strategy, though, is that at least in a lot of the games that I've played, you get to a point in the game where you've maybe played 1 or 2 teaches and you're left with a choice. Either I can play a 3rd teach, or maybe not even play a 3rd teach. I can maybe, KO one of my opponent's characters and set up a 2-drop blocker Vasco Shot. And I can just live for 1 more turn. Or I can go all in and swing with my 1 or 2 teaches, my Burgess, and a huge leader swing or something. And a lot of the skill in Teach is knowing when is the right time. And obviously I can't, in this video, give you a perfect step-by-step guide to follow whenever you're playing Teach. But it's one of those skills that if you're planning on playing the deck and practicing with it a lot, knowing when is the time to commit to going all in. And something that many of the mistakes that I've made when I'm playing Teach is when you're losing, you'll get yourself into a situation and you'll be like, oh, okay, this is fine. And you'll like play a Teach, swing with one of your other Teaches, and then just pass. And you're like, I kill my opponent next turn, and your opponent just has like 2 guys, or like 3 guys, and you have 1 life, or something, and you've no life, and all of a sudden you just realize, oh, if they just swing, and I have like 2 cards in hand, if they just swing like 9-9 or 9-11, I'm just dead, you know, because I can't counter with my hand. I can block one of them, and that's it. So always think from your opponent's side. How are they going to get to lethal? And you want to avoid that for as long as possible. But I think that one of the things to be concerned with Teach is don't be afraid to commit and try and go all in. Sometimes you aren't going to make it, but more often than not, if you have a Burgess and maybe 1 or 2 Teaches, you can get there. You can really get there. So these are the 3 cards that I wanted to highlight from the actual Blackbeard type, Blackbeard Pirates type that are in the deck. Now, if you've been paying attention to any of the topping lists here in the English version of the game, you'll see that there have basically become 2 honorary Blackbeard Pirates type. The first of that being this 4-cost Laboon. Obviously, this paired with .Q gives you the ability to activate mains to KO at 5 cost, and then they can do that every turn, though typically they won't. Typically, your opponent will swing into this or the .Q. This card is great. I think you need to play it if you're going to play Teach right now. But if you're thinking about investing into Teach for OP10, don't buy this card, because this card is way too expensive and will not be in Teach going forward from O10. It's just not going to be there. This card is a great right now, but the sort of idea of Teach changes a bit when we get into O10, because now you have 5-drop Kuzan, who's so powerful that you need to get him in there, and other such things. And the new 6-cost event that helps you with lots of your KOs. So Laboon is sort of less needed. He's needed right now, and he's really great. You will often find that if you play this with a .Q, you rest both of them to KO a guy, you'll probably more often than not find your opponent swings into Laboon. Because if they swing into .Q, not only is .Q searchable, you can maybe refine it with your copy of Stage or with any of your Lafittes or your Searcher events. So he can be quite easily replaced, even though you have more like minusing effects like Laboon in the form of Van Augur. You'll find that your opponent will often swing at the Laboon just because Laboon doesn't replace himself. .Q obviously and Van Augur both draw a card on KO. So you may find that Laboon gets swung at. And knowing when to... It's always a tough decision whether to counter where they swing into the Laboon. So just watch out for that. And of course, the secondary card that's an honorary Blackbeard Pirates card is Finger Pistol. This card is great. This might be one of the best cards in your whole deck, secretly. Not only does it just is a 4-drop event that KOs a 5-cost, so against Doflamingo or against Bonnie or against Black Yellow Luffy, this just like deals with one of their guys. But the fact that it mills too, so effectively this plus the 2 cards it mills puts 3 cards in your trash, which is basically 3/4 of the way there for another Jesus 1k power. And if you have Stage, then the Stage discard plus the 3 from Finger Pistol puts you at 4, so your Burgess gets more powerful. Is like filling your trash like that is really good. And it only becomes better in OP10 when we get the new Kuzan. Because if you mill a Burgess, it doesn't matter because Kuzan will be able to play that Burgess out. So these are like 5 of the like core cards of your engine. There's obviously a lot more. I'm not going to talk about every single card in this video, but these are the 5 that I wanted to highlight going forward. I wanted to take next to talk about a couple of the tech choices that you have in Teach. Obviously, you can run effectively an all Blackbeard Pirates type deck, save Finger Pistol and Laboon, because those cards are so good you need to have them in right now. But I think there's some argument to be made for leaving a little bit of room in your Teach deck at the moment to include some different options. One of those options that I think is very relevant is Ice Age. Now, a lot of you might think, what the heck are you playing Ice Age in Teach for? And I get it. It doesn't seem like the greatest thing. But if you have this in combination with a Finger Pistol, that KOs a 10-drop. If you have this in combination with a Laboon plus a Doku, that KOs a 10-drop. Same with Van Augur and Doku, that KOs a 9-drop. Or even just this with Doku KOs a 6-drop. And a lot of those like bigger numbers, I think one of the things that can really help you when you're playing Teach is delaying your 10 cost Teach turn for as long as you can. Because once you commit to the 10-drop Teach turn, that's it. That's all you've got, basically. You're going to try and play Teaches until somebody's dead. But Ice Age sort of lets you put that off for a turn. Maybe if your opponent plays a 10-drop Shanks, you can use this Ice Age in combination with some of your other cards to deal with the 10-drop Shanks. But yeah, this by itself, just like, even in like your middling turns, if all you've got is a Doku, say you're playing against Doflamingo, in like the early turns, maybe on your 4 or 5 Dawn turn, you don't have, you've maybe established a Doku in the early game, and it's just sort of sat there, and you don't have a Van Augur or a Laboon you can play to KO one of their guys. What you can do is, generally, Doflamingo will have a big arrested character, so you can attach a bunch of Dawn onto your leader and smack the Doflamingo's character. Generally, you should be, especially if you're swinging for like 8 or 9 into a 5k, or even a 6k, your opponent will probably end up not saving that card. And then if you have Ice Age, you can just Ice Age, press my Doku, pop one of your other 4 costs. And that can really help get you back into the game. So I really think that this card is really quite good in Teach. I probably never play more than 1 or 2 copies. I'm currently on 2. And one of the other secret effects is that this card has a trigger. Now, sure, it's only KO a 3 cost or less, so it doesn't clear any of the board for against Doflamingo or, a lot of other decks. But there are a lot of incidental characters, 2 cost Teaches in Doflamingo, Searchers, or low-cost blockers in any of the green decks. If you run into any of like the aggressive decks playing Choppers and such, or Hongos in red and Shanks, this card can mop them up. And the triggering this and having a reasonable target to KO is very powerful. So I think this card is very useful. Next card that I want to talk about is 7 cost Jack. Now, Jack is very interesting in Teach in that, yes, he KOs a 3 cost or less. So if I have any form of cost reduction on board, he can clear a Doflamingo character for free, basically. But because I don't have that built into my leader effect, like I do with the likes of Lucci or Smoker, Jack sort of can often just be a guy who sits there. And a lot of the time, Jack will take up your entire turn. You maybe are playing him on 8 Dawn or on 7 Dawn, and in which case he's either taking up your whole turn or you've got 1 Dawn to spare. Now, sure, in combination with a card like Ice Age, Jack can be really good in popping an 8-drop, but typically you don't have enough room really to run too many tech cards. So Jack also does have the the cycle, which is good, yeah, especially in Teach. But if he KO'd a 4-drop, like, I think he would go in for sure. This card would be so great for your Doflamingo matchup. But the way he stands right now, I think for OP09 Teach, he just doesn't go in. And I think for O10 Teach, you're so committed on... Your slots are so tight that you don't have room for a card like this. So I think Jack, unfortunately, has to get a miss. I tried this card, and I just don't feel like it's quite what you want to be doing. One of the other cards you can consider is Tempest Kick. Now, Tempest Kick, like Ice Age, has a great trigger. But apart from that, and it's an event that gives minus cost. This card is really interesting because effectively it can do the same thing as Ice Age, but obviously you get 2 less cost reduction, but it does draw you a card. And drawing a card is like, the fact this card like draws a card is so great. And I still am considering it in with Ice Age as like, this could be one of the tech options that I run because this card is so good. The only issue is the turns where you really, really want this card are your Doflamingo turns where you're on like 4 or 5 Dawn and you want to swing big at one of their characters and also KO with Dot Q. Typically, in those scenarios, you don't have the 10 cards in trash requirement for this card. And that is where it can really let you down. This card is much better in your later turns, typically, 7 to 9 Dawn. This card is great because you will probably have played, maybe a couple of Searchers or Finger Pistols or just trashed enough with Stage and your leader effect that you probably have 9 or 10 cards in trash so this card's turned on. Do remember that you only really need 9 cards in trash because this counts itself as the 10th card in trash when you activate it. So this card is great. It just isn't quite turned on early enough, is the only issue with it. Though, definitely worthy of consideration. Definitely even, I would say, much over Jack. But I would say these two are very interesting. And the last tech option I want to talk about is Dragon Claw. This, and in case you don't know, this is an OP05 card that is a counter event for 2, counters for 4k, but if you have 15 or more cards in trash, it KOs one of your opponent's 4 cost characters. This card sounds amazing. It sounds like exactly what you want to be doing. You're like, against Doflamingo, they swing 7, counter it, and pop their guy. This is just a better Red Hawk for my Teach deck. But the fact you have to have 15 or more cards in trash, so it's turned on even later than Tempest Kick, means that this card does not quite come alive in that matchup. If this was like 7 cards in trash, this card would be excellent. But it's not. This card is really quite good, but not that great at the same time. I'm sure if you build your Teach slightly differently and you play more so for the Doflamingo matchup, you can play this card and it can work out. But I don't think that this is quite the right card for Teach. There is another event that got reprinted in Premium Booster 1, the Shockwave. Maybe I'll have an image up of it on screen. But that's a 4k counter for 2 that KOs a 3 cost or less. Now, obviously, there's a big difference between carrying a 4 cost or less and carrying a 3 cost or less. But against Doflamingo, if you're going second, you can hold up that event on 2. You can, if your opponent plays a Teach or had played a Perona or a Buggy the turn before, or even a Sengoku, just being able to counter the first swing and also clear one of their bodies. Sure, it's not like a huge body. You know, it's just one of their searchers or one of their or the 2-cost Teach. Those bodies eventually will be the things that kill you if you manage to keep clearing their board every turn. So I would maybe consider Shockwave over before Dragonclaw, but you can equally try them out and see how they sort of go. But right now, if I was to recommend tech options for Teach, these would be the 2 that I would choose. Personally, I'm leaning towards Ice Age just because of the ability that it gives you to delay your 10-cost Teach turn by KOing 10 drops or high-cost cards. But Tempest Kick drawing a card is really, really powerful. And especially where you're very low resourced in a deck like Teach, this card can, like, having a minus cost that doesn't lose you a card can be very powerful. But those are the current tech options that I would be considering if I was playing Teach, when I'm playing Teach. Now, before we wrap up this video, we have to talk about some of the other things that are important to talk about when it comes to Teach. First, that Teach is a decent enough deck now, but when OP09 comes out, I know I'm going to say OP09, I mean O10 comes out next month in March, this deck becomes insane. Thanks mainly in respect to 2 cards. And I'll hopefully have some graphics up on the screen so you can see them as they come up. But those 2 cards are, of course, the 5-drop Kuzan. Kuzan does everything this deck wants to do and more. That card by itself gives you access to any of your cards in your trash to just play out. But he also draws a card. And that's really, really important. Because typically, in Blackbeard, if I want to play my Jesus Burgess, for example, if I'm going to play my Burgess, I play him out for 4, and I go -1 for my cards in hand. With Kuzan, I play 5-drop Kuzan, I go -1 in cards in hand. I then either wait a turn or not. That depends on what I'm playing against. If I can wait a turn and get a swing in with Kuzan next turn, because he can't be removed, he's just going to sit there. Kuzan can just sit there, but then I can activate his effect, trash him, play out my Burgess from trash, but I also draw a new card that replaces the Kuzan that I played from hand. So I've no longer gone -1 with cards in hand. So that's why the 5-drop Kuzan really makes a big difference in this deck. And most of the time, you're probably going to be playing out Burgess off of the 5-drop Kuzan. But you can also equally play Van Augers if you need to get a good bit more cost reduction to use a .Q effect to KO a 6 or 7-drop. But a lot of the time, it's just extra copies of Burgess and the drawing a card is such a powerful effect. And I think one of the main reasons that Blackbeard becomes such a powerhouse in OP09. The other card that we get, less probably busted than Kuzan, is the 6-drop event. I believe it's called Liberation. Now, that event single-handedly changes your Doflamingo matchup. Because, for those, if you don't know what it does, effectively if you have 2 or less characters than your opponent, which if you're playing against Doflamingo is pretty much always going to be true, or if you're playing against any of the Swarm decks is pretty much always going to be true, it KOs a character with an original cost of 6 and an original cost of 4. So even if all it does is KO 2 of your opponent's 4-drops against the Doflamingo matchup, that is something that Teach could not do before. Teach has always been a deck that can remove 1 body a turn through events. Maybe 2, if you get very lucky on like an 8 Dawn turn. But typically, all you can do is remove one character a turn. So to win the Teach matchup, when playing as Doflamingo, all you need to do is just to play guys, keep playing guys until you can play 2 or 3 guys a turn. And then you're off to the races. That card single-handedly, I don't think you'd play more than two or 3 copies of it. I don't think you'd max it out on the full 4, because it's not great in every matchup, but it is a very strong card. That card will single-handedly win you the Doflamingo matchup because of its ability to clear 2 guys in a single turn, which is just not something that Doflamingo was expecting you to do when you're playing the OP09 version. So, Teach really will become an absolute menace in the next set. Right now, he's pretty strong, but with the strength of Doflamingo and the presence of it, especially in the English meta, you're losing a lot of those matchups, and it's very tough. The matchup is winnable, but it's only winnable if your opponent maybe whiffs 1 or 2 of their leader effects. And if they do that, then you have a chance, but otherwise it can be quite difficult. But watch out for Teach in 010. We'll have to see if the new restricted lists changes anything in the deck, whether they're going to hit the Stage or Burgess. I doubt they'll hit any of the new cards. But and we'll have to see how the meta changes after the restricted list comes out. Because if there's less Doflamingos, then you best know that Teach is coming in strong. But thank you for listening to me ramble on for half an hour about this crazy guy. If you like this new style of series, I'm going to hopefully be trying to get these out every time I do, after I've run the deck through the locals gauntlet a couple of times and arrived on a final list. So if you like this content, please leave a comment and a thumbs up. Lets me know that people want to see this and they enjoy it. But that's all from now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.